It's a day that I can't quite remember the like of. A story that's been around for ages. It's been around for so long that we've perhaps become a little calcified in our consciousness of it. It of course, is a story that reaches to the very top of the British establishment, into the heart of the royal family itself. It involves a man who certainly used to be the Queen's favourite son, according to reports and insiders. And it involves what it occurred to me this morning, I think for the first time, it's a grooming gang. We are talking about a grooming gang. Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell ran an international grooming gang. She is found to have, or has been found to have facilitated the sexual abuse of children. This is precisely the sort of horrors that unfolded in English towns like Rochdale and Rotherham. And yet, because it is being undertaken by rich people, possibly rich white people, Tom Sawbrook can take a call at the end of his programme there from somebody seeking to defend one of the accused and to malign one of the victims. That didn't happen with the grooming gangs. Well, it did, actually. When you read into it and you speak to Nazir Afzal, who may be on the programme a little later, about what happened and how it was allowed to happen, there was a perception that even though these girls were often underage, not always, you can be trafficked and groomed even if you've gone beyond the age of consent. You can still be a victim of trafficking in criminal terms, even if you have passed the age of consent. But one of the reasons things were not properly investigated was because of the portrayal of the teenage girls as somehow being, as somehow asking for it, or being the architects of their own abuse. And that's what I literally just heard at the end of Tom's show. I mean, it's actually staggering, isn't it? Maybe I'm doing that fella a disservice and he would have been defending the taxi drivers in Rotherham as well and attacking the victims of the grooming gangs in Rochdale as well. I don't know. I just suspect not. And £12 million of... I mean, is there such a thing as private money for the Queen? We had a little conversation about that in the studio, in the office this morning. You generally become... Everybody sit down. I'm about to have a history lesson with Mr. O'Brien. You generally become a monarch. The first monarch in a line has generally won a war, all right, or mounted a successful invasion. And that war has been won, or that invasion has been mounted in pursuit of booty, right? Not in the modern sense of the word. I'm not going to start rapping, but in pursuit of lucre, cash, spoils. That's why they are called the spoils of war. William the Conqueror came to England in 1066, hoping to enrich himself. 1,000 years later, more than 1,000 years later, the Duke of Westminster, when asked for advice on becoming super wealthy, suggested that the best thing you could do was to have an ancestor who was friends with William the Conqueror. So I don't know if there is such a thing as private money for the descendants of whichever monarch it was that actually undertook a war or an invasion in order to fill their own coffers. But it's not black and white, is it? Whose money is this? Whose 12 million quid is making its way towards Virginia Giuffre and her charity? What does this story tell you about England? 0345 60 60973, or perhaps the United Kingdom. It's a tale of deference to the point of delusion, right? Think how much effort in the last few years has been put into maligning Prince Harry. Just think about that for 1 minute. What's Prince Harry done wrong? Well, he married a mixed-race girl, James, but I can't say that out loud, so I'm just going to say that you're woke. What's Prince Harry done wrong? Oh, he's woke. What does that mean? Can't tell you. I'll tell you what woke means today. 2 stories, I'll share them with you later. It means both vegetarian, and it's a description of Wordle's decision to remove some swear words from that online word game. That's the 2 instances of woke. I'm going to start Woke Watch. I've been threatening to do it for years. I'm starting Woke Watch. Can't work out what it means. Today it means vegetarian. Think for a minute about the effort put into maligning Prince Harry over the last few years. And now look at what Andrew Windsor has done overnight. It was the threat of deposition that focused the mind. Once he'd been, if you like, nailed in court, called to court, all bets were off. No one could defend him after that. and it would have coincided. And I find this almost impenetrable, and I've lived here all my life. I don't have a particular problem with the Queen in particular, and as I've got older, I've become a lot mellower about the royal family in general. I don't know if that's going to change today. But the bit that I find almost impenetrable is that the motivation for this move appears to be the looming platinum anniversary of the Queen, and a desire not to see it polluted by having her second oldest son standing in a dock in New York City accused of the vilest of crimes. Just think about this for a minute. How often do I say to you sometimes, your nose is so close to the screen that you can't see the picture, you can only see the pixels jiggling around. This is astonishing. This cuts to the heart of everything. This story is about class. It's about tradition. It's about deference. It's about this mad framework that's been imposed on our country for hundreds and hundreds of years and is designed to teach us that that person is better than this person. The royal family was supposed to be better than us. Go back far enough, not even that far, and the divine right of kings was supposed to see them anointed by God to rule over us. All right? The rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate. God made them high and lowly, each one to his estate. It was anointed, it was decided by God that these people would live in palaces. And these people, well, I think back to the fella in Aviemore yesterday who's lying in bed with his electric blanket on one because it's the only way he can even begin to try to keep warm as the cost of fuel and living rockets in this country. And the Queen, the head of state, can find 12 million quid to bail out her deviant son. It's incredible when you think about it. Absolutely incredible. If they tried to turn this country into what it is overnight, there'd be a revolution. But it is what it is. It's all we've ever known. And the effort that you now have to put into sustaining the status quo, while Andrew Windsor has provided the most incontrovertible evidence that the status quo is a joke and that these people have no more right to reign over you than you do, is going to be, it's going to be a thing to behold. It's absolutely astonishing. The most vulnerable people in society have £20 a week taken off them by the government, but the Queen can find 12 million quid to bail out her deviant son, and it's somehow not a comparison that you should draw. 11 minutes after 10 is the time. The number you need is 0345 6060973. I haven't even asked you a question yet. I don't even know what the question would be. How can a grooming gang for the super rich not attract anything like the opprobrium and disgust that a grooming gang for the poor attracts? That's not it. I mean, it's the victims that you care about, except you don't. It depends on who's doing the abuse, apparently. Absolutely incredible. I mean, just genuinely, breathtakingly incredible. What is this country built on? People go to war. Prince Harry went to war for Queen and country. And the Queen is now bailing out her deviant son to the tune of 12 million quid. I must add at this point that despite the fact that they're giving the woman who's accused him of rape £12 million, he denies that anything has ever happened, and in fact at one point was denying that he'd even met her. I haven't heard him mention Pizza Express in Woking for a while, have you? I wonder if he's still incapable of sweating. 12 minutes after 10 is the time. Do you fancy just doing it like this? What do you make of it? Or is that just me being a little bit lazy? It's not actually lazy. It's the impenetrability of the scale of the story. It's just hit me around the back of the head this morning. £12 million. Is it public money? It kind of feels like it is a bit, doesn't it? I mean, all the palaces, all the castles, all the cash, the civil list, the investments, the rent that comes in from the Crown estates, all of that. It's just a big cartel, really, isn't it? And I guess, in a way, when we go back to the divine right of kings, the biggest threat to the royal family was the idea that they are just the same as the rest of us. It's why the 20th century was such choppy waters for them, because the media became so powerful and because the spotlight became so strong. And then, of course, the life and death of Diana, Princess of Wales, it looked for a while like it was going to change everything. And the idea that that the royal family were better than the rest of us became pretty much impossible to sustain in the minds of fully cognizant people, right? In the minds of properly, unless you have been corrupted by deference. And I stress again, I've got no particular problem with the Queen. Well, quite the opposite. I rather like her because I'm, just as groomed as everybody else is in the context of monarchy. But this notion that they are better than us, it sort of explains almost everything that I find depressing about the United Kingdom. And now you have the most incontrovertible evidence imaginable that not only are they not better than us, but they're not even as good as us. In the case of Andrew Windsor, hanging out with Epstein, the stuff that is actually on the record and categorically happened, as opposed to the stuff that is still disputed, despite the fact that he's paid 12 million quid to make the allegations go away. Hanging out with Epstein after he'd been in jail. That is just a Rochdale grooming gang for rich white men. That's what it looks like. And yet you'll be cross. Some people will be cross with me for describing it like that, because you are tugging your forelocks so hard, your brains fell out years ago. And so what? I mean, who cares? That's it now. She's not allowed to talk about it until after the Jubilee. There's your priorities right there. She's not allowed to talk about it until after the Jubilee. An exploited, abused woman isn't allowed to talk about her own experiences until after the Jubilee as a condition of the money that has been paid to make her allegations go away. Anyway, I'm just going to open up the phone lines. We'll have a chat about it. I don't really want an argument today. If you're going to try and attack the young woman at the heart of this story or defend the man in the middle of it, then I think you're probably listening to the wrong radio programme. Unless, of course, you're prepared to say that you were also on the side of the groomers in Rochdale and Rotherham, and you think that their victims were largely to blame for what happened to them, in which case we could probably explore how you ended up being such a person. Although what she has endured is on a different planet, really, to what Virginia Giuffre has been through. I find myself also thinking of Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex. They're sort of rendered suicidal at times by the abuse from the British media and by association the British public, and the absence of defence or support from the British royal family. They find 12 million quid for the paedophile's friend, and they can't call in a few favours from Fleet Street and ask them to leave Prince Harry's wife alone. Just think about that for a minute. 12 million quid for the paedophile's friend. Naff all for Prince Harry's wife when she becomes public enemy number one in our often very close to explicitly racist right-wing media. Ah, man. This country, eh? God save the Queen. Josh is in Manchester. Josh, what would you like to say?
Oh, mate, I don't know. Where do you unpack this one from?
I don't know. I've done my best. 20 minutes in. It's time someone else had a go.
I know. I mean, I was just thinking there's so many angles that you could, or different hats you could put on to analyse it from different perspectives, but I don't know, it just feels sordid, really, doesn't it? It's a very sordid affair, and you think, like, on one angle, the Queen, he's her son, but really it's more that this is her year and everything has to go well for her, so let's just put public money to tidy things up and just sort of dismiss it with more money. And you've got to remember, originally, like, this is what Epstein did years ago, isn't it? He signed some sort of agreement that said, look, we never mention any of that, and here's a load of money. Yeah. And that's what Andrew originally banked on, but I think Epstein, quite cleverly, being the messed up kind of human being that he was and the way he controlled people, I assume he made that agreement that Andrew had no power to use it after his death. I don't know. So, I mean, lawyers and wriggling and stuff like this, but, it was only about, a month ago he was insisting that he was going to clear his name and have his day in court, and he was still entertaining the possibility of a return to public life. That line, the Queen line, Josh, that you've just reminded us of, the Sun describes it, caves in to save Her Majesty's Jubilee.
you don't. This sort of thing doesn't unfold in isolation. They might be trying to protect the Queen from having her celebrations polluted, but the Queen really. I mean, my dander is quite high this morning. I want to be sure I will stand by what I say out loud 10 minutes later. But the Queen really should have probably been prioritising justice over the quality of her party.
This is what I said to your assistant before I spoke to you, that in the same way that politicians in the last 10 years now don't fall on the sword, back in the day, even 10, 15 years ago, if he he gets caught with rent boys, or he's cheating on his wife, or he's corrupt,
yes.
You'd fall on your sword, you'd be gone. These days, you can do anything.
Just fill in a questionnaire, mate. Fill in a questionnaire and wait for the Daily Mail to let you off the hook.
Yeah, exactly. How many of them are technically criminals? Or I can't malign them. I know. But
bullies, proven bullies, proven liars, proven adulterers, all of the things that would once have seen standards. And now a proven friend of a paedophile who's paid £12 million to make a woman who's accused him of rape stay silent.
Exactly. And then another angle I come at from when I think in my own life, I know so many young women and women my own age and a bit younger that have gone through horrible things when they were, underage. And you think, what kind of example does this set? And that's why I think the uncomfortable question of what do we do after the Queen goes, really, you know what I mean? I think, again, I said, I'm not really a Republicanist. A little bit, I'm a bit of a socialist in my own, sometimes, but...
I think it's too... Hey, listen, it's your show as much as mine.
Sorry, I do apologise.
No, I don't mean... I don't need to apologise. I'm just thinking, I wondered earlier if it was a bit early to start bringing in questions about republicanism, but as you were speaking, Mark in Bromley texts, I think this is the beginning of the end for the royal family in Britain. The palace knew that Andrew was a close friend of a convicted child sex offender. He's now getting bailed out by the Queen. I certainly won't be celebrating the Queen's Jubilee.
No, and she's done very well. I mean, she's not done... It's a hard job, isn't it, to be a monarch in a constitutional monarchy after you've kind of...
Well, I'd take it. And I love my job, but I'd have a crack at being king, actually, if a vacancy came. If the ball came out the back of the scrum, Josh, I'd probably pick it up.
One funny thing I want to quickly say that I liked, initially you made the reference to 1066, and one thing that I do think that it does lead to republicanism a little bit is when you think from a historical perspective, if you still rule by a de Normandy or a Plantagenet, somebody that could go, look, William the Conqueror was genuinely my great-great-great-granddad, we conquered it by right of force, you might go, okay. Yeah. But we're so far away from that line.
It's a cousin, it's the daughter. No, I mean, you're right, and that's why I tried not to call him Prince Andrew, because... it seems such a ridiculous honorific in the current context, and of course that reminds you how ridiculous all these honorifics are, really, when push comes to shove. 24 after 10, Josh is in Manchester. I'm fairly confident that Josh caught himself before he said a rude word there, but my apologies anyway if you were offended by the opening syllable. Mamta is in Walton-on-Thames. Mamta, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Hi. I totally agree with what you've been said and what you started the show off with. I'm kind of calling for you for the first time, so I'm a bit nervous.
No, it's only me. Don't worry.
So I totally agree. And what I can't understand is why the Queen hasn't stood up for justice and let him be tried, and why she's bailing him out, why he's been bailed out.
Because she can, you see. So it's simply the power of money, isn't it?
Yeah, but the thing is, she's also the Queen. She's the head of the country, and she really should put justice first. She's head of state, and even as a mother, it's a woman-to-woman thing. Her son's kind of exploited, being involved.
But someone else will say, as a mother, of course she's going to protect and do everything she can to protect her son. That does actually cut both ways, doesn't it?
I'm a mother of three. You know what? Yeah. I have sons, and I don't think I could.
No, you couldn't, but other mothers will help their sons bury a body rather than see them, taken away to jail or. Yeah,
but the thing is, in the past, if you look at all the royalties, they have, Elizabeth first put Queen Mary of Scots, when she was beheaded, etc., etc. Things you just have to put the right first. There's a clear right and wrong here, and she probably knows deep in her heart that her son's been involved. And I don't understand.
No, I do. I do. I mean, it's the nuclear version of what we talk about every day on the programme. It is the doffing of the cap and the tugging of the forelock on a scale that almost defies belief. I'll have a look in my inbox shortly, probably after the 10:30 news, and find you some examples of that. Oh, here's one. Okay, who would your choice of head of state be, James? President Corbyn. If you had a brain cell, it would die of loneliness. It's such an incredible intervention, and it's all born of putting effort into somehow sustaining your support for a ridiculous status quo. Thank you, Mamta. Hi, James, please don't identify me. I'm a long-time listener, so be kind. I don't know if I can be cruel to a tech. Well, I just was, actually, wasn't I? So, yeah, OK, I'll be kind. I really, really hope you give short, sharp shrift to anyone who calls in today and victim blames. Says she's in it for the money, or it happened in a nice place. It's not like she had any injuries, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to have to take your word for it that people are saying stuff like that. I've heard hardly any myself. I'm at a loss for words, to be honest. The Queen... well, you cast aspersions on the Queen's mothering, and I think in the circumstances you're entitled to, because normally at times like this you say, well, what about the parents? Where were the parents? What were they doing? The Queen is a terrible mother, writes this texter who's asked to retain anonymity. I'm sure by the end of the day I'll be sick of the attempts to bring balance to the conversation. I wonder how long it will take before Meghan and Harry get brought up as a distraction. It's already started on a TV show. Yeah, I that is incredible when you think about it, because it shows you how daft it all is. Because if you're so desperate to defend Andrew Windsor that you throw Prince Harry and his wife under a bus, you're actually making a mockery of the monarchy anyway. Why is the brother of one future king worthy of more protection than a brother of another future king? Answer, well, one of them stands accused of doing something truly despicable and has indeed done things that are disgusting simply by dint of his associations. And the other one has married a woman of colour and made quite a few noises about how the world could be a happier place if we all stopped being so stupid and mean. Well, stone him, but give 12 million quid to the other fella. How long will it be? I don't know. Before The Sun, which today's front page is his final disgrace, how long before it starts pretending to have another hissy fit over the fact that Prince Harry thinks that his children deserve some form of protection by dint of the family they had absolutely no choice but to be born into? Oh, how dare he! Incredible. Already got one prominent journalist, not a million miles away from this parish, saying live on television yesterday that death threats against Keir Starmer aren't a big deal. 4 months to the day after David Amos was killed. Dear, oh dear. This is what happens when you've got something rotten at the top of a society. And I'm thinking more of Boris Johnson in the context of the Keir Starmer story, but in the context of the bigger picture. What does this story do to you? What does it teach you? What does it tell you? How do you respond to it? 0345 60 60973. Is there a sense, and I was going to save this a little later, is there a sense that the royal family, I mean, we talked about whether it could survive the appalling response to the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. Is there a sense now that something has shifted in the minds of the nation? If it can shield and protect and ultimately pay 12 million quid to bail out this man, why on earth do we take the knee? To bring in a phrase that assumed a controversial tone last year because people like Priti Patel didn't think you should take the knee in order to protest against the very real existence of racism, or at least she felt it was perfectly reasonable to boo the people that did it. And all the people queuing up saying, the only person I will kneel for is the Queen. Yeah, the only person I will kneel for is the mother of the paedophile's friend who paid 12 million quid to get him off the hook. A rare morning where I share a story with you about which you're already well aware, splutter a bit, and then just invite you to ring in and respond. It is... I haven't got the words, and it's my job to have the words, but there's something about this scandal, this disgusting story, that speaks to the very heart of our country and our culture. The bad stuff, not the good stuff. The way in which we are held back by the circumstances of our birth, or, of course, propelled far beyond our abilities by the circumstances of our birth. The way in which forelock tugging and deference describes a world in which two people committing exactly the same conduct will be judged entirely differently. Some people having absolute kittens about me pointing out that Prince Andrew's good friend Jeffrey Epstein was just the head of a grooming gang for the super rich. You can't even process it, so you'll shoot the messenger. It's not even an opinion. It's just a matter of fact. It's what he was jailed for. It's what Ghislaine Maxwell is in jail for running a grooming gang. But because The way grooming gangs have been reported in this country have so often been a provocation to racist bile. The idea that this man, this friend of Prince Andrew's, who introduced him to the woman that accuses him of rape, could be just the rich white version of a taxi driver in Rochdale is so gross to your groomed sensibilities that you can't even begin to accept the simple truth of it. And what do we do? Like the mother of one of the Rochdale taxi drivers was in some position of power in Rochdale. Do you think she'd still be there? Do you think that the newspapers in this country would have let her stay Lady Mayoress of Leeds or whatever the honorific would be? But the Queen can pay £12 million to get Andrew Windsor off the hook. The newspapers will have a little brief period of manufactured fury and disgust, and then they'll go back to attacking Meghan Markle for the crime of having brown skin and her own mind. Oh, and being woke. 0345 60 60973. My late mother, writes Bill, used to say that by their friends you shall know them. It's just true. God save the Queen. Tamara is in Harrow. Tamara, what would you like to say?
Oh, good morning, James.
Hello.
How are you?
Well, should be obvious by now. I've been screaming at the microphone for the last 30 minutes.
Frustrated then, darling, frustrated.
Yeah, that'll do.
I wanted to comment on the idea of woke, because what you've just said is exactly why people are waking up. I know it's now a new term, but I've been awake since 1984. So a lot of people get labelled as conspiracists, where it's actually what I loved about the British public when I first moved here in the 80s was you guys had the ability to critically think. Like I came from a brainwash. Definitely. So what I think is happening when I came from my country was brainwashed already. I came to England in the 80s. You guys were all critical thinkers, but slowly but surely you've been brainwashed now. And so the idea of woke is some people, the corruption is so thick now in every institution within Britain and probably the world.
You're talking about gaslighting. You're talking about gaslighting, aren't you? And that's why days like today are so profound in a sense, because they actually show you briefly the reality, as opposed to this very manufactured notion that things have to be the way that they are because that's our values. That's what Oliver Dowden was claiming yesterday. These are our values and our traditions. How dare anybody challenge them? And anybody who does is the enemy. Anyone who does is the deviant.
Well, that's it. To me, a lot of British people are waking up in a bed that's filthy. Yeah. They thought they were snug. They thought they'd be cared for the rest of their life. They thought they'd have a social service that would support them. But we're waking up and our bed is rotten. Our bed is dirty. And to me, you made a statement the other day about cutting off one of the heads of the Hydra. There's another Hydra to come. What we need to do as people is really root out, not the first layer, not the second layer. We need to take it down at least 3 layers and really root this all out, because in our human conscience, we will feel sick. And we've got to feel bad for all these girls. Well, no, because money talks again. That's the god of the world, isn't it? But a lot of people are waking up to the real social injustices. And now with all the heating going up, I think we're going to see a lot more people waking up.
Well, I don't know. We shall see. You've already got a government desperately pushing back against any attempts to drag the country into the 21st century where the circumstances of your birth. This is what they mean by values and tradition. And this is why they reject the concept of privilege, because privilege is luck. And these people refuse to accept that the only reason that they are in their roles in life is dumb luck. Dumb luck, an accident at birth. I mean, it's so obvious to me because of the circumstances of my birth. When you're adopted by a loving middle-class family and you would otherwise have been brought up in an orphanage or by a single teenage mother in Ireland, you realise, luck, I would not be me were it not for that twist of fate in 1972. And yet for these people, born on third base, convinced they've scored a triple. Born 3-0 up, Andrew Windsor, absolutely certain he's the king of the hat-trick. Born 3-0 up, but he's a hat-trick hero. It's the only way you can make sense of it. Until my dying day, I will not understand why the people at the bottom, why the poor man at the gate work so hard to support... Well, I do understand it because of the effort that's put into doing that. Oh, it's so patronising and condescending to suggest that people are encouraged to vote against their own interests. Doff cap, tug, forelock, vote against your own interests. Emma's in Horsham. Emma, what would you like to say?
You asked the question, James.
Yes.
Good morning, by the way.
Good morning to you.
What this story does to a person.
Yes.
And I'm finding myself this morning, I've been wanting to use the expression for a long time, incandescent with rage.
Yes.
But also...
Straight away, or was it a slow burn?
No. Just... I nearly, furious.
I had to dig, I had to think, I had to work out why I felt the way that I felt, because the story's been in front of me for so long that it almost lost its weight. But something about this huge sum of money paid out to silence this gross allegation has really got to me. Really. Yeah,
but I feel in the same breath mildly depressed.
Go on.
And part of the reason, like you, I've been following this story because I was one of the people that watched the documentary, which basically told this story, not just about the vile Epstein and his mate, but also that it wasn't just Virginia Giuffre who said that she had sexual relations with Andrew. There was also another man on the island who saw it regularly.
Okay, just be careful. Just be careful legally, because I haven't got the full magnifying glass.
No, fair enough. But
I'm interested more in what this chapter in the story has done to you. The incandescence, the depression comes from the thought that okay, we'll all get cross for a couple of days, and then everything will go back to normal. All of the other people connected with this cabal of corruption will carry on going about their business, and in a sense, Maxwell, Epstein.
This will get swept under the carpet. At some point, kind
of.
It will. The reality is, what he's done is, with his own privilege, has said, look, whether or not I did this or not, he knows he did it. I know he did it.
Whoa, no, you don't. I mean, oddly, that is one of the consequences of the case and the payout, is that you can't possibly know that, and he denies that he did. That is the record. That is what the record shows. You're perfectly entitled to have an opinion, but you don't have knowledge.
No.
You can't possibly have knowledge.
No, well, absolutely, unless I was there, which I wasn't.
Exactly.
But doesn't it get... What I wanted was for him to stand up and say, I'm going to prove that I did not do this.
Yeah, same. And you'd think that's what the Queen would have wanted as well.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Absolutely.
That's why it has so many layers. I'm going to knock it on the head there, because you're worrying me slightly with your... looseness of tongue, Emma. That's all. Not a criticism, just a caution on my part. 10:43 is the time. Stress again. He denies all of the allegations that the woman he's just paid £12 million to made. Otto is in Lewisham. Otto, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Otto.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you got to the heart of it earlier on when you said that you came close to saying something is rotten at the heart of Denmark, but you kind of missed your mark there.
Everyone's a critic. Are you Otto English?
I am Otto English.
Splendid.
Yes.
It's a very good Twitter.
Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Well done. You've got the rubric correct. What made you pick up the phone, Otto?
Well, I was in my car getting breakfast for the kids, and I was listening to you, and I thought this sparks so many things that set me off, to be honest. I could actually feel my blood beginning to boil, but for all the right reasons in the car. First of all, the whole culture of deference that surrounds the royal family, which goes right to the top of this country and which sits right at the top of what we are and how the Brexiters and all of those Rees-Mogg types want us to perceive ourselves as in this sort of deferential culture. And I was actually saying to your producer that I won't say who, but a couple of years ago I was commissioned to write an obituary of the Queen in advance.
Oh, yeah.
Which is something you're not really meant to talk about, but I'll break the
that's
obituary.
Fine. No,
I'm going to break the obituarist's code.
Yes, this is absolutely normal behaviour, and we have things prepared for when that sad day dawns, so there's nothing remarkable okay.
I won't say who it's for, but it was the single hardest task I've ever been assigned, because I set out to try and write an obituary about Elizabeth Windsor.
Yes.
Well, that's impossible to do, because there's like an iron wall around the royal family, and particularly around the Queen, and you cannot dig in beneath, even like really sort of unimportant things like what her favourite song is, or whatever. It's everything is shrouded in a kind of mist of propaganda. It's propaganda, essentially. Everything is so micromanaged around the royals. And, you know, when a BBC or even an ITV royal correspondent comes on the television, they automatically put on this sort of deferential voice, like almost like they're talking about a god.
Yes.
And the whole thing is handled with...
I just did it
gloves.
myself. I just did it myself. If you told me that... Well, I don't know if I did, but when you mentioned working on a potential obituary, and I will be a sad day, but when that sad day dawns, it's probably not the sort of language I'd use when discussing anybody else. Is potential passing. There's a sort of, I think we all have a sense, you perhaps don't, but doing this for a living, you almost slip into a slightly different gear when you're discussing these matters, but not today.
Yeah, well, I have to say, I'm entering into your echo chamber to say it. You've been incredibly brave this morning.
Oh, I didn't know about that. Don't say that. Are you suggesting I've lost my knighthood?
I don't think you'll even get an MBE.
Oh, dear.
It's a wall that cannot be breached. It's something that people are not.
But it's
prepared
not.
to
It's
discuss.
not me, and it's not. It's him. He has blown the wall apart. The only question is whether it will be rebuilt very quickly. History suggests that it will be. That the forces will coalesce to sort of almost write him out of history in the way that they did with his great uncle, wouldn't it?
Well, they're already scrambling to kind of there was talk across the media last night and across Twitter, the Twitter sphere, and in the pages of respectable newspapers, that he might be able to find his way back. I mean, the idea that Prince Andrew can find a path back into public life after this is just absolutely beyond the kind of any normal human brain. I don't see how anyone can fathom it.
Yes. No. Well, I mean, except of course you do.
Except of course they do. Yeah.
And that is the mystery that I think confounds us both. Otto, I should tell you, is also the author of a book that's quite pertinent to this conversation, Fake History, which looks at the 10 biggest lies from history and at the people who propagated them. Quite a timely reference there, given the context of this conversation. It is... Thank you, Otto. It is... I hadn't really realised that. Do you think I have kissed goodbye to the knighthood now? Is that it? Oh, flipping heck. I'll have to go after one of those papal ones that Jimmy Savile got. That'll fill the gap. 10:47 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the sheer scale of this scandal has left me almost confounded. The idea that the son of the Queen will pay £12 million of our money in order to silence a woman who has accused him of the vilest crimes for which his friend and confidants, plural, have already been convicted. Ghislaine Maxwell accused and convicted. Jeffrey Epstein accused and convicted. Photographs of Andrew Windsor showing them round Buckingham Palace. His mates with the man and woman that ran a grooming gang, and one of their victims has accused him of the vilest crimes. And Otto's dead right, you know. The idea that you then have a conversation about whether or not he will ever be able to make his way back into public life, which I have to tell you was my first thought this morning. And the producer very politely called me an idiot. The conversation today is not about whether or not Prince Andrew can find his way back into public life. The question today is how we can have ended up in, or perhaps we always have been, in a country where... a man who is supposed to be at the very pinnacle of our society, the son of the actual head of state, can bring this sort of horror upon her, but more importantly on us. Because it is Queen and country, isn't it? That's the phrase. All the people with flags in the background when they're giving their interviews. The politician who said we should all have a picture of the Queen up in our houses or in our offices. This is what Oliver Dowden was talking about when he talked about the values and traditions that we need to protect. The idea that these people are better than you and better than me. They're just not. And the best you can hope for from a member of the royal family is that they're all right. Got so lucky with someone like Prince Harry, who's clearly very special and brave, but that's why he has to be kneecapped by the combination of media and establishment while pretending that he's done something wrong. I'm going to read this tweet because I'm going to pick up on it, Helen, but only in a friendly way. Harry is no different, James, from the rest of them. He's not special other than being a recipient of the privileges you were just talking about. He is no more worthy of the doffing than the rest of his relatives. And a large part of the reason I disagree with you, oddly, is that he would agree with you. And that's why they had to cut him out like a cancer. Because he would agree that his status is ridiculous. And that the only way he can justify having that status is by using it to do good. Whereas approximately 80% of the energy that the rest of the royal family put into their lives and works is sustaining the status quo that they're part of. Harry left it. He can't not be Prince Harry. He can't cease to be the son of the future king, the grandson of the Queen, the son of the future king, the brother of a future king. He can never cease to be that as long as the royal family exists. But his decision, and listen, it may turn out that he's been taking us all for a ride, but I currently find it highly unlikely. His decision was to and those utterly unearned points he was born with for what he considers to be good work. And that, I think, is why he's different from the rest of them, and is why he's worth being called special. In a time of deceit, in a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. And if the royal family, as we're really recognising today in a way that we rarely do, if the royal family isn't a construct of deceit, universal deceit, the divine right of kings, it's God's will that a king sits in a palace while many of his subjects starve. It's the most epic con job ever, really. And in a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. Now, that's true of a peasant shouting abuse at the palace gates. For the king's son to be describing it in such terms, or to be coming close to describing it in such terms, is astonishing. And thinking about it may explain the vitriol unleashed on him and his wife even more than her ethnicity. That just became a rather convenient issue around which the usual suspects could gather. That's the point. I mean, Prince Harry could never do anything that shines a light into the silliness, for want of a stronger word, of the royal family compared to what his uncle has done, what Andrew Windsor has done. And yet, we're not capable. And it's scary, you know, even if you find everything I'm saying completely true, you might also balk at the idea of changing anything drastically. It's scary, you know? How many people would want to knock their house down and start again? Very few. It's scary. But days like today just remind you that giving fealty, is that the right word? Fealty? Fealty. It'll never be on Wordle, will it? 6 letters. Fealty, deference, kneeling. Have to curtsy when you meet her. Her own family have to curtsy when they meet her. Like, all of that. I never strike. I just go, that's a bit weird. That's fine, though. Yeah. Studied it. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. Been studying it for years. And you stop on days like this and think, look, the mother of this man, if I meet her, I'm supposed to bow. Oh, and then Tony Blair's wife didn't curtsy, so they threw her to the wolves. Tony Blair's wife refused to curtsy when she was at the palace. I think she did. I may have misremembered. And that was the story. Not, we are a country in which you're supposed to bow and curtsy at this person for no reason other than an accident of birth. And on a day like today, it just all falls away, doesn't it? It falls away like peeling paint. And what you're left with, what are you left with? This man's mum is the head of state. She's forking out 12 million quid to silence a woman who's accused him of the worst imaginable crimes that we know were committed by 2 of his mates, one of whom he was still palling about with after he'd been to prison. Listen, I feel sorry for the Queen in a sense that I would feel sorry for any mother with a son like this. But I don't know that every mother would reach for her purse. It's a bit like Doc Cotton, isn't it? So when Nick Cotton comes around and says, come on, Ma, just another couple of £100. I feel sorry for Doc Cotton in that context. That's the same sort of sympathy that I feel for the Queen today. In fact, it's identical. The sympathy I feel for the Queen in her dealings with Prince Andrew is exactly the same as the sympathy I feel for Doc Cotton when nasty Nick was up to his shenanigans and unpleasantnesses. But at some point, You sort of render or recognise that this is a national issue. It's not a family issue. This is our country. We're always told, we need the royal family. They're such a great figurehead for our country. They're such a great standard bearer for our reputation abroad. And they're such a great catalyst for trade. And hello? McFly? Really? I've no idea how it's got to 11 o'clock. I do apologise. I didn't even know. There was a little bit of me when I came to work this morning that thought, I can't be bothered to talk about it. But there's something about her face when she was 17. Something about it. And his face when he's 61. And something about that sense that until very, very recently he thought he could style it out, or he thought he could pull it off. Not unlike our current Prime Minister's approach to the allegations that he's faced throughout his life. I can just style it out. It can just hang in there for long enough, it'll all go away and it'll move on. And then you've got the face of Virginia when she was 17 years old, and you just think, this just can't be right, can it? And we're supposed to go back to waving our little flags on the Mall, are we, next month? Well, newsflash, we probably will. I am, not for the first time, and almost certainly not for the last time, fascinated by what you have to do today, on a day like today, to sustain the myth in your own mind that this is how things should be. This is good. This is great. Yes. Son of the Queen, 12 million quid. A friend of paedophiles, paying off an accuser. How do you have to do it? I mean, what do you have to do? I know I ask in vain these days. It's a rhetorical question. But, goodness me. How many flags would you have to put on your Twitter profile in order to still have that little weird feeling of patriotism, what you describe as patriotism, on a day like today? And I say again, I feel sorry for the Queen in exactly the same way that I feel sorry for Dot Cotton when Nasty Nick is up to his business. 4 minutes after 11 is the time. Nazir Afzal is, as you know, a former chief prosecutor in the northwest of England, responsible, appropriately enough, given some of the parallels I've been drawing today, for bringing the so-called grooming gangs, many of the so-called grooming gangs, for justice. Indeed, while working under Keir Starmer as Director of Public Prosecutions, they finally got a handle on some of those prosecutions that had been ingloriously passed over in previous years. And you've been pretty outspoken about this, Nazir, and understandably, perhaps, from the perspective of all victims of child sex abuse. Tell me why.
James, absolutely right. Well, the Prince has spent the last 2 years victim blaming. He's been saying that victims are lying, by reference to Virginia Giuffre, but more readily than that, he was saying that they have false memories. These are the kinds of things that I've heard over the years from people who are working on behalf of predators in relation to people who've been traumatized by the most horrific abuse. And, he thinks that by simply saying, I'm sorry, that deals with it. I know, I'm afraid, far too many victims who will not accept the apology, who've been re-traumatized by the whole experience.
Re-traumatized because it's an echo of their own experiences, of being told, but not being believed and being told that they were liars. Or even 2 days ago, I was reading that Andrew's lawyers were asking for the original copy of that photograph, as if, and obviously the implication being that it had somehow been faked or photoshopped.
Forgery, made up, all of that. They've heard that. We also have to remember, we have a 1% conviction rate for rape in this country. So 99% of reports never get anywhere near a courtroom. So people are extraordinarily courageous if they come forward, extraordinarily courageous if they give evidence. They then suffer this constant refrain that you're making it up, you're lying, you're mentally ill, whatever it may be. And they will have heard what's been said very publicly over the last 2 years by the Prince, and his legal team, which will have reminded them of what they have gone through and will have deterred many others from coming forward. That's why I'm angry. I'm angry because it's a struggle to encourage and support victims to come forward. And so many of them have chosen not to because of what they've understood to be the experience of those who end up giving evidence. And just simply saying, I'm sorry, is not good enough. You've got to also ask yourself this question. He regrets his association with Jeffrey Epstein. He didn't mention anything about his association with Ghislaine Maxwell, another convicted sex trafficker. One is unfortunate, two is a bit careless. I think you've got to ask yourself this question: does having money, does having power mean that you can escape any form of justice? And I think that is a question that I'm sure is on the lips of pretty much all of your listeners right now.
Well, it is a very... Well, I hope it is, and if it wasn't before, it will be now. Because if he didn't have access to this sort of cash, what would be happening to him now?
There would be a hearing later in the summer.
And would he have to be there? Would he have to attend?
Well, he didn't have to be there. If he doesn't turn up, then she gets judgment by default.
Right.
She wins.
Right.
He has to either present a defence or not, as the case may be.
Yes.
And he would have done that. And we just learned a few minutes ago. Apparently, Prince Charles persuaded him persuaded him to settle.
Right.
So even now, we're getting impression evidence suggesting that he's never really wanted to stop this case from going ahead. He wanted to carry on. He used every technicality in the book, James, to try and get this case kicked out. Lost every legal argument. Had only one option now, which was to give evidence or not defend the claim, and then ends up paying an enormous amount of money in order to prevent that day in court, which I think damages justice, it damages victims, it damages survivors. It makes us think that power, money, still gives you enormous privilege.
You mentioned your anger, so I'll mention mine briefly. And it partly sprang, somewhat surprisingly this morning, from the realisation, I think probably for me belatedly, that what Jeffrey Epstein presided over was the jet-set equivalent of the kind of grooming gangs that you prosecuted.
100%. Well, it's exactly the same process. The manipulation of very vulnerable people, getting them involved in low-level criminality, making them feel that they are special, giving them warmth, allegedly giving them things that they think they need, trapping them, then abusing them, and then passing them around as if they were absolutely nothing. And, I don't care whether you are the richest person in the world or the poorest person in the world. That's not on. And we've got, sadly, a situation where people feel that they can do this with impunity. And the other thing that needs to be said, James, is where is the Metropolitan Police on all of this? Because 2015, Gina Giuffre made a complaint to the police. They told her then there was no case to answer. They told her again in 2019 there was no case to answer. In 2021, she was told again, there was no case to answer. It's for the FBI to deal with. And then, of course, we have Prince Andrew saying he will cooperate with the FBI and didn't do so.
Ran a mile.
There was still an outstanding criminal investigation. What happens to that? Well, that's entirely a matter for the police. But the fact that they have dragged their heels over the last 6 or 7 years doesn't fill me with great confidence.
Nazir Afzal, is always, it's not quite an appropriate phrase to say it's always a pleasure to talk to you, but it's always a privilege to learn from your experiences and to hear some of your wisdom. There's a bit of a relief as well on a personal level that you support that parallel I drew 100%, because I made it rather in the heat of the moment, but as the heat diminishes, it becomes irresistible. That is exactly what Jeffrey Epstein ran. And after he went to jail for running a jet-set grooming gang, Prince Andrew was still palling about with him and flying to America, if not to visit him, then certainly, I think staying at his house, didn't he? Yeah, after he'd got out of jail? How do you just don't, do you? That's how you do it now. You don't review your attitude to the whole of the whole structure of our society, the whole mad hierarchies that we're born into. You don't review any of that. You just double down on your support for it and never mention Andrew Windsor again. That's it. You just forget he ever existed. A bit like you may have done with the Duke of Windsor when he turned out to be a Nazi sympathiser who had the Queen sieg-hailing in the Buckingham Palace garden. You remember when that picture came out? No, oh God, don't mention that. No. I mean, as a kid, and again, I feel sorry for her, in the same way that I feel sorry for Dot Cotton whenever Nasty Nick turns up asking her for money. I'm being criticised by many people, including Wayne in Basildon, for the somewhat outdated nature of my popular cultural parallel there. So I'll be happy for another suggestion, but I think Dot Cotton, who is still in EastEnders, albeit that Nasty Nick's not been around for a while, I think she's such a cultural icon that and obviously in terms of class and deference, such a contrast to Her Majesty the Queen. But they are peas in a pod today, both tragic victims of deviant sons, Dot Cotton and the Queen. There's a parallel you weren't expecting to hear when you woke up this morning. 11:11 is the time. Andrea is in Barnet. Andrea, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
Really about my thoughts around 2 points, really. Firstly, about the money with Andrew, but also about sort of the fact that the Andrew scandal throws up important questions about the role of a hereditary constitutional monarchy and its dangers. So I quickly looked up on the Republic Twitter feed what they said about the money, and you may have covered this, but it says we pay the Queen £20 million a year from the profits of the Duchy of Lancaster, a state-owned property portfolio,
Yes.
where the money for the settlement is coming from. And that sort of in itself seemed unethical. But the thing that I kind of really hits me is, you know, the role of hereditary monarchy in many ways in 2022, it sort of seems somewhat ridiculous that, you know, we have one, because if you're a judge or a doctor or a pharmacist or an accountant, your children don't just become a judge or a doctor or a pharmacist because you are. But secondly, it actually really throws into sort of the limelight the actual dangers of a hereditary monarchy, throwing up someone completely unsuited to the role. And I think that has sort of almost happened because Andrew was sort of, you know, I don't know where he is in line, but what if he had been the firstborn son? And then the other thing is...
Well, what if, well, God forbid, something had happened to Prince Charles over the last few, before Prince William was born? He would have slotted to the top of the succession, wouldn't he?
The next one. And within that sort of question about the role of a hereditary monarchy and the dangers of it, the thing that actually brought me to be a Republican, I'd previously been pretty neutral about the monarchy, is that I'd always thought of the Queen as head of state, but it's a sort of ceremonial role. But actually, when Johnson tried to prorogue Parliament, and for the first time really ever in her monarchy, because it was the first time we had a government in my lifetime who was lacking in integrity, she wasn't as a head of state where she's needed to keep checks and balances. And first time she's called into action, she didn't stop him proroguing it. And then I looked up about all her sort of roles truly ceremonial, and actually they weren't. She does really have...
She had to be persuaded by Jacob Rees-Mogg's lies. Actually, that may not be fair. He may have been too thick to understand what he was talking about, or he was lying. Those are the only two options. She had to be persuaded by Jacob Rees-Mogg to do it, which means that she had agency. That's what you're telling us.
Well, yes, and also, you know, she's an apparently intelligent woman who's been in this role for many years. So it seems extraordinary the whole country knew why he was proroguing Parliament, that she didn't take it. And I feel this whole looking at all together as a whole, doesn't it bring up serious questions about that we should ask as a country as to the role of
you see, you're being woke.
Monarchy?
You're being woke now. This is what Oliver Dowden told you yesterday. You're not supposed to ask these questions. You are engaging in a woke psychodrama that could undermine Western democracies. I hope you feel suitably chastised, Andrea. Big Ollie Dowden will be round soon to give you a right old ticking off.
Well, unfortunately, they're very our current government. You know, we have a press that is not analytical and critical enough. I'm not asking for a sort of a sudden revolution. I'm asking for the Parliament and for us as a society to ask serious questions. I think the Andrews scandal is a real watershed moment as to what is the role. Can we look into? I know Nick Cohen from The Guardian looked into the sort of Charles and the Queen and the amount of bills they vetted before they get to Parliament. Why? I'd like to know why that isn't occurring. Shouldn't we be doing this?
I mean, I may be overreaching slightly by trying to knit it all together, but this is why woke has become the latest watchword, isn't it? Because challenging any of this gets described as unpatriotic, which is a fairly hefty weapon to hit people with, isn't it? You hate your country. And actually, no, I hate the idea. Here you go. Here's what we hate, Andrea. Bill Prosser has put it brilliantly in a tweet he sent while you were talking. 2 words for anyone who thinks an hereditary monarchy is a good idea. King Andrew.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly.
There it is.
Yeah. So, I just
That's
think
it. And let's leave it there, shall we? I mean,
okay.
2 words for anyone who thinks a hereditary... This is your call in a sentence. 2 words for anyone who thinks
absolutely right.
A hereditary monarchy is a good idea. King Andrew. I don't know what rank you are, Jeff, but I noticed that you're texting me from the Catterick Garrison in North Yorkshire. Jeff Elliott, I speak of, a man of uncommon wisdom and insight. He texts, James, at 10 o'clock this morning, you said you were absolutely speechless about this carry-on. Speechless, even. James, at 10 o'clock this morning, you said you were absolutely speechless about this carry-on, but for the last hour, you've barely shut up. Give someone else a go, man. Can't really argue with any of that. Although, of course... Quite a few of you are pointing out that the mic drop moment in criticism of a hereditary monarchy, 2 words that should really put you off it for life, King Andrew. There is a counter to that. There is a counterplay to that, which is, as quite a few of you have pointed out, and I probably should have spotted myself, President Johnson. But would President Johnson really wield any more power than Prime Minister Johnson? Not really. So I'm still going with the hereditary monarchy thing. You know, Rome wasn't built in a day. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And back to Jeff Elliott. Let someone else have a go, man. Eileen is an Exmouth. Eileen, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello, hi. I'm interested in what went on behind the scenes.
Oh, well, I don't know any more than you do.
Well, what we've been told today, until today, is that the lady Virginia Giuffre wanted to take it to court. She wasn't after money. She wanted to get justice, and I have no reason to not believe that. So there's a big switch around. Now, there's been teams of lawyers on this. It's not just Prince Andrew against Virginia. It's a team of lawyers in the UK against a team of lawyers in America. And they've come to an agreement somehow. This will have been worked out at the highest element of the establishment. And she's now got a gagging order till after the Jubilee.
Apparently,
This is really powerful stuff. So this is the power of the establishment. Can you imagine what's gone on behind the scenes? I know we don't know, but we can imagine the threats, the deals, the money, we've got American and the UK in this together, who are always such great friends. You know, this is just an extreme power that's you can't fight against this kind of system.
I don't think you can. And that text I read just before the break about King Andrew, I mean, you think, because what you're describing is the scale of the effort that's been put into trying to protect him and ultimately paying. He hasn't paid his way out of trouble.
I'm not sure they're protecting him. I think they're protecting the establishment itself.
The final play, when she stripped him of all his titles, and the idea of him, I don't know what the verb is, Eileen. I keep wanting to say being deposed, but it's whatever the verb is for a deposition. But
this is my point. I don't see it as two people. I don't see it as individuals. We live in a world of individuals. I don't see that. I just see it as
the
a
institution.
System.
Yeah.
Yes, and these are the head players in this particular game, but the game overall is the establishment.
No, the only point I was making is that what if it had been, if he had been the heir to the throne, if the machinery of the state is going to move, or the machinery of the establishment.
They'd have done the same thing, don't you think?
I think they'd have done even more, is the point I'm making.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't begin to imagine, because he has essentially now finally been hung out to dry to protect the brand, as it were. And yet, if he'd been an even more senior royal, how much further would they have bent to protect the brand?
How much history do people in this country know? Because the beginning of the monarchy, we only have a monarchy because there were thugs who went round the country nicking land off other landowners.
I'm beginning to think you missed my introduction at the top of the show this morning, Eileen.
Oh, I might have done.
But you can't go. Don't say that. No, you don't say that at all. It's God-given. It's the divine right of kings, Eileen. This is God's will.
So in a sense, James, it hasn't changed at all.
No, not a bit.
It's just a modern-day version of exactly what it's always been.
Yeah.
And there's no power on earth that's going to, I would love to have been a fly on the wall at some of those dealings, because my actual belief is that both sides, both legal teams, Andrew's team and Virginia's team, were one and the same thing.
I wouldn't go that far. I think you go a little bit tinfoil hat at that point. I don't know who pays her legal bills, and I think
no,
she.
But I mean at the bottom line, the actual basis of what everyone's fighting for, I believe they're one and the same thing. It's America and it's Britain. No, come on.
No, I understand what you're saying. I'm allowed to disagree with you on that final point, that final leap. I disagree with you, but I think the reason why, and this is one of the things that Otto English writes about in his book, Otto was on earlier, the absolute sanitised version of history that we're taught is actually a big part of this problem, and that is what Oliver Dowden is talking about. Oh, it's all beginning to make sense today. Thank you, Eileen. There's no punishment for missing my introduction to the show this morning when I made precisely the point that you made. Essentially just sort of warlords pursuing booty, pursuing spoils, and then centuries later their descendants, often quite tricky descendants. When you watch Who Do You Think You Are, it turns out Danny Dyer could have been King of England if the family tree had been shaken in a slightly different way. You realise how utterly nebulous a lot of these lines of succession. Oh, who was the other one who was related to everybody? Was it Josh Widdicombe, wasn't it? Josh Widdicombe and Danny Dyer. Ladies and gentlemen, you're Prince Charles and Prince Andrew, or Prince Harry and Prince William, if the cards had fallen differently. But that's the whole point, is that you can't point out how flimsy and nebulous it all is, because then almost all of the status that is bestowed upon people at birth, and how many people now are thinking about Jacob Rees-Mogg, if he'd been born in Albert Square, what do you think would have happened to him in life? It is what they are terrified of being questioned. You can't start pulling down statues of slavers, because if you start pulling down statues of slavers, you might move on to statues of, 17th century princes or Henry VIII. You might, oh God, and if you start pulling that down, then all of the nonsense upon which everything pageantry is built would fall apart like a cheap suit, and that's what they're terrified of. So actually, I now have a better understanding of why these weirdos keep talking about having flags in the background and pictures of the Queen on the wall than I did before Prince Andrew took 12 million quid off his mum to pay off a woman who's accused him of rape. 26 minutes after 11 is the time. Sarah is in New York City. Sarah, what would you like to say? The view from the other side of the pond.
Hi, James.
Hello.
Can you hear me well?
Loud and clear. What's on your mind?
I am so disappointed. I don't even know how to express myself properly.
Go on.
My disappointment. Because, so I live just down the street, actually, from where the Ghislaine Maxwell trial was, here in downtown Manhattan. And this was supposed to be the next chapter, which is to hold the men in the periphery of this,
Yes.
grooming gang, as you called it, human trafficking ring, just to hold them accountable. And, Prince, I knew there was a chance there would be a settlement, but
Yes.
I also had a feeling that it would have to be such a large amount that there's no way that the royal family, who are heads of state, are going to be able to do that. Because actually, to me, that sounds like a diplomatic issue.
Sure.
To use sleazeball tactics, but $16 million. Never in my wildest dream would I have thought that they would be able to shell that out. And especially since, just
She's
not
pretty
too
rich.
long ago,
His mum's quite rich, Sarah. You know that.
I know, but you guys were nickeling and diming Prince Harry about security just a few weeks ago. So I was
I
okay,
see.
they're penny pinchers. They're not going to do that, right? I had no idea that it was just not even real, the outrage,
Gosh.
And I just think it's really disappointing. And, I mean, basically, another thing that Andrew did that was really, really disappointing was that, especially as somebody who's part of a family who's head of state and our allies, you're our allies, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that he tried to do to stop the trial that really outraged people in New York is the way that Virginia was able to proceed with this is through this little time of window. There's a new law, like a 5-year window, where people can bring forward sexual abuse claims that have run out in the statute of limitation, right?
Yeah.
And he actually tried to overthrow that whole law. That was his whole first mission. And I was like, wow, there is somebody who's part of the head of state, family, our allies, who's trying to overthrow a law to help sexual abuse victims. So we were really looking forward to hold him accountable. But I also understand her, look at what they've done to Harry, right? Who wants to go against that machine? I would take my money too if I were her, probably, to my charity. It's going to her charity, by the way.
Some of it is. I don't think it's been fully established how much goes to. I don't care, personally. She's entitled to every penny this fella's ever. She can have his whole skiing chalet or whatever whatever the Queen has found down the royal sofa, as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, that's. I hadn't thought of it like that. That's such a helpful perspective. There's so much at play here that the wriggle off the hook, albeit the very expensive wriggle off the hook, is. Well, it solves problems for Andrew Windsor, but not for anybody else. Quite the opposite, in fact. And that legal shenanigan that Sarah describes is pretty despicable. But then, of course, we've got a Prime Minister in this country who describes investigations into child sex abuse that may have happened 20 or 30 years ago as spaffing money up the wall. This is bizarrely one of those days. I started today thinking this is so out there and so outrageous. I didn't even know how to begin to approach it. But as the conversation has gone on, most recently with Sarah's contribution, it oddly has sort of encompassed lots of other things that are going on around us and have been unfolding, if not for centuries in some cases, with the absurdity of a monarchy anyway, then the kind of contempt for the rule of law at the very top of society that Boris Johnson increasingly seems to embody, and investigating historic allegations of child sex abuse is something that your Prime Minister has publicly described, in this room actually, I won't use the word he deployed again because it's a pretty unpleasant word, as a complete waste of money. Absolute waste of money. The bloke who spent 37 billion quid on test and trace after Dido Harding was unlawfully appointed to run it, as was found in court yesterday. He thinks that investigating allegations brought by people like Virginia Giuffre and some of the other victims of Jeffrey Epstein is a complete waste of money. Tells you quite a lot about the man, that. I'm stretching a bit to bring Grenfell into this conversation, but the way the establishment closes ranks and the way that the members of the establishment, since the Brexit referendum debates began, have tried to portray themselves as anti-establishment, it's incredible, isn't it? But Grenfell, another example of the establishment closing ranks in order to... I don't know, deny ordinary people justice. And I think, was the deputy leader of Kensington and Chelsea Council not one of the people that has subsequently been put in the House of Lords by Boris Johnson? I could have got that wrong, but it is surprising. Do you remember Rock Family Trees on the telly? Do you remember that? It's a brilliant thing. I think it started off as artworks, and they'd show all the links. So, like, most obviously, when, say, Ronnie Wood moved from the Faces to the Rolling Stones or something like that, but they'd show... And in the Midlands, there were particularly good ones as well, because, you know, Led Zeppelin came out of the Black Country, essentially, although John Paul Jones was from New York. And they do these family trees showing how bands all had the same sort of lineage, if you like, and the links between them. And you could do that with what we loosely call the establishment, with the Brexit bolus at the very heart of that was very successful in pretending that they were somehow the anti-establishment figures. It's an astonishing achievement, in the same way that, you know, the Great Train Robbery was an astonishing achievement. 11:36 is the time. Back to this gross story. I'm a bit drained already. We're only halfway through the programme. I don't expend this much emotion on a show more than 2 or 3 times a year. A couple of years ago it was different, when I was getting increasingly frustrated by almost the national refusal to see what was on the road ahead of us, right across the political spectrum. That choice that people faced in 2019 had struck some of us as absolutely dismal, long before the ballots opened. But and then Johnson's inevitable victory in 2019, getting increasingly frustrated by the inability or the refusal of people to see what would happen if that juggernaut, that bus, was left unchecked. And here we are. Now we are. But since then, I haven't expended emotion like this, and I wasn't expecting to. It's just a disgusting story. It's a national shame. And I know I overuse this phrase, but it's absolutely perfect today. That the level of forelock tugging that needs to be undertaken today to pretend otherwise is nuclear powered. Even the right-wing newspapers have temporarily joined the real world, you know, temporarily gone after Andrew Windsor with the fury that they normally reserve for the entirely innocent and blameless wife of his nephew Harry. And it is just gross. Absolutely gross. And all I've done is ask you what you think, really. No specifics, no detail, just the emotional stroke intellectual response to a story of almost unfathomable grossness. And by that I don't mean that the crimes he's accused of are worse than when other people are accused of them, or the associations. I just mean the way that it cuts to the heart of our country. And that's the thing that no one can argue with, because he is the second son of the Queen. And the full machinery of state, or at least of the royal family, has been brought into play to protect him, culminating ultimately in a realisation that if they didn't pay off his accuser, then the royal family itself could be under existential threat in a New York courtroom. And tomorrow we'll be talking about The Masked Singer again. Oh, we won't because it's finished now, but you know what I mean. Oh, no, we won't. We'll be talking about how awful it is that woke people exist. I'm going to do a woke hour at 12. I've seen the school that's decided to get rid of meat from the school canteen described as woke. So today, the great mystery of what does woke really mean, today the answer is vegetarianism. I like that topic. I love that story. It's one of the things I've realised I was a complete idiot about in my past. So I like to help cure other people of their complete idiocy. So we'll do that from 12. But, why do you think they're feeding you this crud about the National Trust, about Black Lives Matter? What's wrong with taking a knee in opposition to racism compared to taking a knee to honour the mother of the paedophile's friend? You see what I mean? God, don't ask those questions. Don't go there. Just don't open that box. Where will it end? Down with statues. Up with the Andrew Windsor. See, it's just days like today, you see it all in glorious Technicolor, and then it just slips out of sight again, doesn't it? And I think it needs an event of this epic magnitude to really bring everything into sudden and sharp focus. And it's not pretty. And I completely understand the temptation, even for people who recognise how ugly it is, to look away and pretend otherwise. For people who want to continue to believe that it's beautiful, I don't quite get the psychological processes that you must be undertaking. It's 20 to 12. 0345 606097. You'll get through now, actually, for the first time since 10 o'clock. The only question is, will I have time to talk to you? Roxy's in Crystal Palace. I've got time to talk to you, Roxy. What would you like to say?
James,
hello.
Hi. What
hello.
a great day to be British.
Yeah, all right. It's the lowest form of wit.
I know. I listen to you a lot, and I always want to call in, but I never have, so I thought today is the day.
Thank you. Welcome.
I just was speaking to your producer, and I just wanted to say that I think we have to look at this as a positive.
Yeah.
I think that we have to look at the whole thing as a positive, because what it actually does is it lifts the veil on the monarchy, and it actually shows it for what it is, which is actually just an establishment that supports traditional elitism and classism in this country. And I think that it's actually ingrained in British culture. I think that whether you look at the Brexit vote or whether you look at the support of the monarchy, I think it's all part of the same package.
I do.
think that all it does, as you said it was a national refusal to understand what Brexit would do and how it would damage the country. And I think that people like the Tories, like the monarchy, they bank on the people of this country buying into this historical indoctrination of elitism and classism. And you have to wonder if
it's not confined to Britain. I look at Donald Trump's children.
No, of course it's not.
Yes.
But it has become sort of this sort of Stockholm syndrome, I think.
Yeah.
It's been a way of sort of manipulating the masses into believing that this is what they deserve. And I think that as long as we're going down this road, it's going to continue. And I would like to think that what's happened with Andrew today is actually going to make people stop and think and actually look at everything as a whole and realize that they're being duped.
How long have you lived here? How long have you lived here, if you don't mind me asking?
So I've lived here 25 years.
Okay, because I was going to applaud your optimism stroke naivety there.
Well, I'm trying to be positive. If you follow me on Twitter, you'd realize that I wasn't that optimistic.
No, well, I shall try to find you. I mean, or maybe I'm being a bit of a misery guts, and actually I'm just being a little bit jaded by recent years and experiences and thinking the truth doesn't matter. So this little glimpse of it we get today, you think, and they always say the royal family, don't let the light in. That was always a big thing going back to the abdication. Don't let the light in. If you let the light in, they'll see that we're just like them. And then the questions about why we get the golden carriages and the palaces while they don't, they just become unanswerable. But we've had centuries of waiting for that dam to break. I just don't know that this is going to be the moment.
Well, I think the other thing that people need to realize, too, that I think is incredibly important, is that they need to understand that this is the crown. It's actually an establishment. So, yes, people say the royal family, and I think that's part of the problem. Yeah. I think what they need to start realizing is that it's not just the royal family, it's the institution that is the crown. And that's like a whole other thing, because you can personalize the royal family. You can say the queen is a lovely old lady who's just lost her husband. However, behind that and underneath of that, and everyone should feel sorry for the fact she lost her husband, because it's tragic.
Just like Dot Cotton, just like when Dot Cotton lost her husband. Yes.
And actually all the people that lost their loved ones through COVID felt exactly the same way about their family as the Queen did about her husband. And I don't think that, what I think, again, what is shameful is the fact that so many people talked about the Queen sitting alone when Johnson was having parties.
Yes.
And yet, really, what people need to understand is there were millions of people,
hundreds of thousands of people. I think people do remember that. I do think people remember that. I think the Queen, the iconic nature of that face certainly just makes me think of my friend's funeral. It doesn't make me think of Prince Philip's funeral. The picture of the Queen makes me think of my godsons at their dad's funeral, and the fact that they'll never get to see the God, you've set me off now. They'll never get to see the hundreds of people that would have been there to take away for the rest of their lives the knowledge of how loved their dad was by how many. That's gone forever, that moment now. And he was having a bloody party.
And I guess what worries me about the media is that they focused on the Queen being alone rather than all of the people of this country in many respects. And unfortunately, what that does yet again is it supports this idea of the royal family being more important than the people that have lost people that they loved and cared about.
Yeah, and of course it does. Of course it enforces that idea. And we had it here. I remember. It was a caller, 6 months ago? And he'd done service. He'd been in the Navy, I think. And it came to a point where I said to him, do you honestly think that Andrew Windsor, does anyone else remember this? Andrew Windsor is a better person than you are, or is more deserving of privilege than you are. And he just, I think he came pretty close to saying yes, didn't he? I think he, and you're right, that is that you're not born like that. Each born to his estate, each one to, you're not born like that. It's a lifetime of gaslighting and grooming that makes you think that Andrew Windsor's a much more valuable human being than I am. Do you remember that call? I'm sure that happened. Roxy's reminded me of it. Thank you, Roxy. And I tell you what, it doesn't rain, but it pours. The Metropolitan Police have just launched an investigation into allegations of offences under the Honours Prevention of Abuses Act 1925. This decision follows an assessment of a September 2021 letter related to media reporting alleging offers of help made to secure honours and citizenship for a Saudi national. It was Andrew Windsor's brother, Prince Charles, who was at the centre of that story. One of his key factotums stood accused, it was alleged, of, well, there you go, that's what they're investigating, help made to secure honours and citizenship for a Saudi national. Let me give you the full detail. The Special Inquiry Team has conducted the assessment process, which has included contacting those believed to hold relevant information. Officers liaised with the Prince's Foundation regarding the findings of an independent investigation into fundraising practices. The Foundation provided a number of relevant documents. These documents have been reviewed alongside existing information. The assessment determined an investigation will commence. There have been no arrests or interviews under caution. To which, no doubt, if there were a few conservative backbenchers queuing up to defend these allegations and accusations, they would now reach for the Andrew Windsor card and say, well, at least he wasn't knocking about with sex traffickers.